Good evening. Oh, goodness, that's really loud. Hi, everyone. If you all could take a moment and find a seat, there's a few over here in the front row. There's some in the back, and we're going to get started here. Well, I am so pleased to see this group here. What a wonderful collection of Metro Parks supporters, of community members and friends. We love being able to utilize this new facility in such a meaningful way. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Allie Effler, and on behalf of the Metro Parks Toledo family and the Metro Parks Foundation, welcome to the final session in our 2023 Sustaining Our World Speaker Series, brought to you in partnership with Dana Incorporated. We are now in our second year of this speaker series, and our goal is to bring discussions that are free and open to the public, focused on topics related to the significance of our natural resources, the importance of protecting and restoring our ecosystems, and the ways that we as individuals and as community members can make a positive difference for our environment. How many of you have been to a Sustaining Our World session before? Very good, awesome, I love it. How many first time? Very good. Okay, and then how many have been to this facility before? Awesome, I love it, wonderful. Well, for those of you who haven't been with us for a session or to this Metro Park, we're really, really thrilled to have you. This Metro Park, the Glass City Metro Park, is our newest Metro Park in our system. We have 19 parks. We now steward over 200 miles of trails and 12,000 acres across Lucas County. This park, yeah, thank you. And I guess I should always highlight, we are really proud to be stewarding one of the very best park districts in the country, recognized as that in 2020. So thank you all. This park in particular is really special for our community because it is the first part of a much larger vision for what we believe that our downtown waterfront can look like and feel like to our community. It's built on former industrial property and brownfield land, and when completed, the entire Glass City Riverwalk will bring 300 acres of green space, 5 miles of trails, all to the waterfront along the Maumee. It will connect and already has connected over 300,000 visitors, both local and out of town, to high-quality green space, playscapes like we've never seen before, like our ice ribbon out here, which opens this weekend, trails, and the riverfront. But it's more than that because it will add important natural space to our waterfront. It will filter runoff that heads into the Maumee River. We will plant thousands of trees and build new native habitat for our local species. We are really proud to be able to steward this and advance this property on behalf of the Metro Parks and our community. And I would encourage you all to consider ways that you can get involved. That's something that we're going to be talking about a little bit tonight, both in terms of how you get involved with your Metro Park system, whether that's as a volunteer, as a donor, but also in terms of how we can take individual actions to make a difference for our community and our world. And our speaker will talk a little bit about that as we go forward. Before I introduce the program tonight, I do want to say a very special thank you to Dana and their partnership on this series. They not only are partnering on this series, but they're a lead donor to the Riverwalk project. In 2023, Dana was named as one of America's climate leaders by USA Today, and on topic for tonight, the company has pledged to be carbon neutral by 2040. We are very proud to partner with Dana. Thank you so much for your support. So a final note before I welcome Fritz Byers to the podium. You all have notebooks here, and if you've been with us before, you know the drill. As the speaker is presenting, if you have thoughts or questions that you would like to ask, go ahead and jot those down. At the end of the program, we'll collect those, and we'll be able to share those with the speaker for the Q&A session. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my partner in crime for tonight, Fritz Byers, who is a Metro Parks Board of Commissioners member and really has been instrumental in helping to put this series together. So thank you, Fritz, and welcome.
Thank you, Allie. Thank you, Allie. The Sustaining Our World series, made possible by Dana's generosity, is an integral part of our commitment to the community. Our mission is to preserve and protect natural land and activate it for the use and education of all. But our vision is broader. We aspire to work collaboratively with all of our partners across the region to steward natural resources, to promote physical and mental health, and to serve as a beacon for a plausible, sustainable future. It is therefore apt that this year's Sustaining Our World season, which has been rich and diverse, will conclude with our speaker tonight. Doug Farr is, by any measure, one of our nation's premier advocates for sustainability, not just as an easy buzzword, but as a comprehensive approach to choices, thought, engagement, design, and individual and collective action. Our city, as those of us who live here know, is full of world-class institutions, and we are justifiably proud of that. But the sense of possibility and progress that we share isn't an accident. It is a result of resisting complacency and always challenging ourselves to take the next big step and to dream the next transcendent dream. Doug is the ideal person to help us with that. He is provocative in the best sense of the word, asking important questions, challenging assumptions, and leading essential conversations. A group of us had a vibrant discussion with Doug this afternoon, and at the end of that, Jason Kushma remarked aptly that 10 years from now, we will look back at this day and see it as a pivotal moment in the ascension of our city. Many of us share the vision that by the end of this decade, Toledo will be the most admired mid-sized city in the United States. And that is a plausible dream, right? As we were finishing our conversation today, Doug said to me, I feel as though I'm traveling from the future to here. And as I thought about it, I thought that's a profound statement. He's entirely correct. Doug is here tonight to help us collectively imagine how we can achieve the dream we share. It is a great professional privilege and a personal pleasure to introduce to you my friend Doug Farr.
Thank you, Fritz. Good evening. Can you hear me? Well, that's great, because I'm going to be talking. How are we doing? Great. All right. So I'm really honored to be here in Toledo. I'm a native of Detroit, so I always think of Toledo as our kind of little sister, if you will, down the road a little bit. So as Fritz said, I am visiting from the future. The year is about 2027, and things are fine. So don't worry. But I'm going to tell you about what happens between now and 2027 here in Toledo. So as you can see behind me, the title of the talk is A Call to Climate Action. And this one's going to be fun. Today is kind of personal because I have not yet talked about the things I'm going to talk about with you tonight. I do a lot of public speaking, but when I shift gears big time, it becomes much more conversational. I tend to be much more of a storyteller than a lecturer. So I hope you like stories because you're going to hear a few of them. So first thing, what is going on with the screen there? I don't know what that is. Is that just the one slide? Okay, fine. So a little background on me. As Fritz said, I'm an architect and planner. This microphone? Yeah. Sure. Ready? Better? Oh my gosh. The back of the room. Can you hear me? All right. It seems boomy. I promise not to do percussive sounds. All right. So about me, I'm an architect and city planner. This is a timeline of projects in our office, and what you see there is over about 25 years. Below the line are plans we have prepared, and above the line are buildings we have designed. And so tonight I'm mostly not going to talk about planning except one slide, which is this. We've had the pleasure of twice working in Toledo, once in 2004 and once in 2018. And in 2004, the idea of a riverfront park was talked about. Wouldn't that be great? Toledo's greatest asset is the waterfront. We're not taking advantage, all those kinds of things. It was back in 2018, nothing had changed. But I knew, because we had a little contact with the Metro Parks, that plans were afoot. And I just got to tell you, I hadn't been back since 2018. What a dramatic transformation. This is the coolest new waterfront I've seen. It's just amazing. You guys should be so proud. Are you proud? You should be proud. And that achievement is made possible by a really effective unit of government. Toledo Metro Parks is known outside of Toledo as being really good at what they do. Part of being really good at what you do is not being complacent. So my challenge, my charge, my invitation tonight is to say, you're really good, but what's next? So I'm going to report from the future about the things you will be doing, because I'm going to tell you to please do them, and hopefully that works. So the other part of our practice, when we are not doing plans, we design high-performance buildings that use a fraction of the energy of a typical building, buildings that may be completely powered by the sun, buildings that pay no energy bill. Those sound pretty cool, huh? And they are not NASA, it's not moonshot, it's now routine. So these are, we've got actually dozens of buildings. These are 4, just to kind of illustrate. A long time ago, we started with, have people heard of the system called LEED, L-E-E-D, LEED? It's kind of green building. Show of hands if you've heard of it. So we did the world's first LEED platinum renovation in 2002. So a long time ago, we designed, lower left, greenest home in America. It was, of course, LEED platinum, but it was net zero energy and spectacular. It was described as having Jetsons architecture. For those of you who are old enough to remember Jetsons, that's a thing. Lower right is a renovation of a major facility at the University of Chicago. It's the Harris School of Public Policy, the greenest building in higher education. And it was an uninsulated mid-century building that we figured out how to reduce the energy use by half. And it still looks the way it was meant to look. And then upper right is our proudest, newest project, which is called the Academy for Global Citizenship. It's a K-8 public charter school in the city limits of Chicago. It's net zero energy. They will pay no energy bills on an annual basis. 90% reduction in potable water use. We are collecting the rainwater off the roof and flushing toilets with it. Very healthy, all kinds of wonderful things. Please come visit. But this should be every new building in Toledo should hit one of these standards, one of these criteria. So, but it's my passion for, can you tell I like what I do? I mean, I want to make sure you're clear about that. I really like what I do. And I have made the mistake, according to my wife, a couple times to write books about it. So disappear for a couple of years. Is that thing done yet? Is that thing done yet? So this was book 2, Sustainable Nation, came out in 2018. And what I was obsessed with in writing this book was this idea of, okay, Doug, you figured out how one building at a time you can make a better world, but goodness, is that fast enough? And aren't the challenges bigger than that? And how can we collectively organize ourselves to make change faster? That was, in essence, what the thesis of the book was, and I proposed specifically that with all the things that we would like to do better, it's going to take 4 generations, 100 years to go from all the stuff we do now wrong to getting it right, because that's how long change takes. And if that happened, that would actually be wonderfully ambitious. But in the book, did a deep dive on these 3 areas, Sprawl, which you're familiar with, is kind of how we've sort of settled the land across most of the United States. Auto-dependent patterns where you really can't walk, every trip is a car trip. Too much of America is settled that way. That's a problem. Obesity is now a problem too. I don't know if you know this, by 2030, half American adults will be obese, and our lifespans get shorter, our healthcare costs are the highest in the developed world, a major problem. But I'm going to set those aside tonight and talk about CO2, climate, and climate action as the kind of, I think, the most urgent crisis that faces us, and in some ways the least visible, and that's why I want to talk to you about it tonight. And here's a simple, if you watch the nightly news, I think the news has sort of picked up that climate's a thing, and anytime there's a fire or a flood, it's a climate story, right? I don't believe in catastrophizing any more than the news already does. They're pretty good at it, right? So, but this map in kind of a nutshell captures for me why we might want to care about this. So this is a map that shows, sorry I could not find this map for Ohio or Toledo, but I hope you'll accept, again, the friendly nudge from the north. So I've got Detroit, Michigan, and the state of Michigan, and it's a very recognizable state. I don't know if you've ever seen anyone from Michigan hold their hand up and tell you where they're from, or whatever, what they're going to do with their hand. But here you have it. So what this shows is that the climate of the state of Michigan under a lower emission scenario and a higher emission scenario. But the punchline is we're on a higher emissions path in this world. That is to say, we are not cutting our greenhouse gas production much at all. What it means is Michigan will have the climate of Oklahoma in the year 2100. Let that sink in. Does anyone here want to move to Oklahoma? Yeah, me neither. Actually, you can look at this, and actually Ohio might be Texas. Anyone here want to move to Texas? So that's another choice you can have. But involuntarily, because the world is warming and the climate is changing, we will have that climate. So that's pretty much cooked. That's happening according to EPA data. So it'll happen slower or faster. It's dramatic, it's slow, and who should care? Who's impacted? Children, grandchildren. I think about it in the context of my wife and I live in a wood-framed house in Chicago, which would never survive a minute in the South, because in the North we get deep frost winters that kill off termites and wood-eating bugs. If your climate is Oklahoma, termites do fine. You don't get a deep frost. So our house will get eaten by insects, as an example of what could happen under this scenario. So there's bad futures. We want to minimize it, and we have to get to work. So I'm going to give you a little kind of quiz here. So this is a graph, if you can see this, showing the CO2, carbon dioxide pollution produced in the United States over 150 years. And I'll tell you the good news, it's already peaked in 2005, so that's good, except part of the reason it peaked is we moved our industry to Asia. So we don't make things as much as we do, we don't pollute as much as we used to. But here's the quiz I'm going to ask you. How quickly do you think the United States will take to reverse course and get rid of CO2 pollution? So I'm going to ask you just sort of two quick questions, maybe three choices. Anybody think we can get rid of carbon pollution by 2050? Show of hands, 2050. Next one, 2075. No one's responding. Can you hear me? How about 2100? Can we decarbonize by 2100? So let me do it all again, because I'm not sure everyone was awake. 2050, any takers for 2050? No. 2075, one in back. Thank you. Two. The optimists will meet at the bar after, yeah. And then 2100, still a lot of hits. Okay. So this is an unanswerable question in many ways, except if you write books. So one of the things we thought was to ask this question. We'd like to stop polluting. We'd like to reverse course quicker rather than slower. what are some examples in the United States where we've reversed course? And cigarette smoking is probably the best example. We all appreciate that smoking was popular and made a person look cool in the mid-20th century, and it was a popular thing. And you can see here that here's the rate of smoking. Peaked in 1964, but this was the single most successful public health campaign to reverse what we do, reverse course, stop smoking cigarettes. So that's what the line looks like. That's what it is projected to be. Now there's mischief here with e-cigarettes and vaping and new technologies to addict you to nicotine that are profitable for companies. But I'm not talking about that tonight. Just look at that curve. So I asked this simple question: if we decarbonized, stopped producing CO2 pollution at the same rate as we quit smoking, when do you think we would do that? The answer, I'm going to just give you the answer: 2150. So you optimists at 2075 and half the room at 2100, it's worse than that. Our most successful reversal as a society would take us, have us stop polluting about 100 years too slow. 100 years too slow. So I'm not here to depress you. What I'm here to do is to stress that in the discussion about climate, our scarcest resource is not money, it's not lithium, it's time. It's time. And figuring out how to make different decisions real now time. So that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So anybody ever seen Charles Dickens and the Ghost of Christmas Past, Present, and Future? So I've just shown you the Ghost of Christmas Future, but like in Scrooge, it doesn't have to happen that way. Tiny Tim doesn't have to die, all those kind of analogies. So you've seen, as I said, I'm a visitor from the future. You've seen the future. Do you like what I'm selling you? I hope not. So this is what the work is about, is to figuring out how to reduce the harm we are doing vis-a-vis the climate. Now, I don't need to introduce this man, but if we were Vulcan, this wouldn't be a problem. The Vulcans would have seen it coming, avoided it, calculated it with great accuracy, and there would be no global warming. That's Vulcans. Humans are totally not Vulcan. We want stuff that do us harm. We don't like to change. We're kind of lazy. We're creatures of habit. So were that we were Vulcan, I would just drop the mic and we'd go drinking, right? So, but we are not. So in the book, Sustainable Nation, I identified what I call accelerants. These are things, and you don't have to read the fine print. Just know that there are strategies out there that help people change faster. And I'm going to refer to a couple of them. And we need this because we are not Vulcan. We need to be convinced to do the right thing. We need to be urged to do the right thing, sometimes incented, even bribed, even compelled. So that's a nice theory. I like this quote. In theory, there is no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is. So Yogi Berra. So it's a great quote because it says, be humble when you have a theory and you're actually trying to apply it. Jumping from theory to practice is not a given. So, first experiment was in 2020 during early COVID. In a virtual way, I stood up a campaign, which is one of the 6 accelerants, called Carbon Free Chicago. And here's the goal. Carbon Free Chicago is a 30-year campaign for the equitable and timely decarbonization of Chicago. So not 150 years, 30 years. And what does success look like? We actually gave this definition. And when we would have meetings, I would ask people to recite this quote aloud. I'll read it for you. Success looks like this. By sunrise on Earth Day in 2050, Chicagoans will no longer burn fossil fuels to power or heat buildings, vehicles, industry, or the grid. Does that capture your imagination? Does that seem nutty? Does it seem doable? Some tippy heads there thinking about it, whatever. But this is success. This is what success would look like if we were taking climate action. And strike the word Chicago and write in the word Toledo. Okay? So visualize in your life all the things that you do that burn fossil fuels, and there's a couple of other things besides fossil fuels, but like your car, your house, industry in its proud industrial town in Toledo, and then your electric grid, and they all need work, right? But the things I would have you focus on are those things you have agency over, those things you control. We'll talk about that more in a minute. So this lunch today was sobering to me. And that was where I made the comment to Fritz, like, I guess I'm visiting from the future, because I have apparently been living in a bubble for several years of kind of people doing this work on decarbonization, climate action, and so on. And so I scrapped my PowerPoint, and what you're seeing now is the new one. This is the post-lunch PowerPoint, because I had to fix everything and go back and sort of fill in some gaps. And so this idea of a common agenda is a gift that I want to offer to you and Toledo, and I'll explain it in a minute. But basically, around the country, cities are on a path to decarbonize, to get out of burning fossil fuels. And why would you do that? There's a bunch of reasons, but one in particular is, if you think about economic development in the state of Ohio, when you buy natural gas or you buy petroleum, that money's going to another state. It's probably going to Pennsylvania, Texas, I'm not sure, West Virginia, but it's money that's shipped out of your economy and you can't get it back. So if you could recapture, no, I thought I said something wrong, sorry. Oh, she swallowed a bug, I'm sorry. Sorry. Anyway, money spent on fuel is wasted and goes to somebody else, and it doesn't help, right? Health is another thing. We'll talk about that a little bit. Lots of good reasons. But here's what cities around the country are doing. So this is work we did back in 2020 to take a snapshot of what was going on. So I'm sharing this with you. I didn't update it this afternoon because there's a lot of progress in all these places. But here's the data points we drew from. First one is pretty close by, which is Ann Arbor, Michigan. Some people live here, who are here tonight, live in Ann Arbor. There's a radio person and the Dana person. So we Farr Associates worked on the Ann Arbor decarbonization plan in February of 2020, so I know this pretty well. What Ann Arbor did was the city council voted, first thing they did was they declared a climate emergency. Like, it seems like an emergency, so the council did that. You'd say, you know, what does that do? Well, in the case of Ann Arbor, it set in motion a lot of things. There are actually hundreds of cities around the country whose councils have voted to declare a climate emergency, the majority of which have done nothing, but Ann Arbor was the outlier. So what they did was, well, if it's called an emergency, we're going to act like it's an emergency. So they gave their staff 100 days to come up with a plan to decarbonize their whole city in 10 years. 100 days and 10 years. So like you say, we want to have it done in 10 years. So how long should the planning take? Pray to God it's not 5 of the 10 years. They said, we can't spend the 10 years planning it, we just got to do it. And so it was really fun to be part of. And the answers were not hard. And these are, you know, all this has been updated. It basically is $1 billion over 10 years for a population of 121. It was $824 a person per year. So, and that was the cost of it. Net, we don't even know what the savings are yet because fuel went to 0, right? So that was a really powerful example. Next one is energy codes. Your building code, you know, requires a certain level of energy efficiency. California and now all across the country adopt what's called a stretch code. You are more aggressive, you're more ambitious than the standard code cycle. Again, these are 2019. California was requiring net zero energy ready homes, which means these are new construction, they're energy efficient enough that solar panels on the roof will power them. Pretty cool. So like, they didn't require the solar panels, but they required the efficiency so that if you wanted to buy solar panels, you would pay no utilities. Pretty cool. So as I said, the future is very cool. St. Louis, Missouri was the first city in the Midwest to adopt something called a building performance standard. So the easy part of climate action and building decarbonization is new construction. The building you haven't built yet, it's pretty easy to make it better, right? Because you haven't done it yet. You haven't screwed it up and all that kind of stuff. The harder part are existing buildings. We had a walkthrough today with the Toledo Public Library. Beautiful building, one of the hardest buildings to decarbonize because it's gorgeous and has no insulation, all that kind of stuff. But the building performance standards, which started on the East Coast in Washington and New York, are the best policy to figure out how to incentivize people to fix older buildings. So we can talk about that in the Q&A. And this is probably the granddaddy of all these examples. Berkeley, California was the first city in the United States to ban new natural gas connections to new construction. So let me repeat that. You're applying for a building permit in Berkeley, California, and building a building, you can't serve it by gas. Wow, that's radical, right? Where did it start? Berkeley, right? So, but who else is talking about this stuff? Chicago in January of 2024 will pass a gas ban. Berkeley 2019, Chicago 2024, Toledo 2020 something, right? We're starting the conversation, but this is going on around the country, and there are lots and lots of opponents to it. There's people that say, I like my gas, or don't tell me what to do, all those kinds of things, legitimate. So, but it's part of a conversation, and I'm just making you aware these are the trends out there. And then you'll never make sense of this until I explain it to you, but basically in Pennsylvania, their state housing agency, which regulates the construction of new multifamily housing, required a very high performance energy standard called Passive House. And the first year they introduced it, they tracked all the projects. The first year they introduced it, the Passive House projects cost 2.5% more to build, but they would usually use half as much energy as the ones that cost 2.5% less, right? So half the energy, pretty impressive savings, right? The next year, when teams figured out how to do it, the Passive House, then average. So the learning curve, once you make it required and everybody's got to work together and collaborate, contractor, architect, owner, engineer, people figure out how to kind of not cut corners in performance, but cut corners on cost. And so you say you're adding cost. In the first year, when people were figuring it out, yes. Every year thereafter, no. The better buildings are cheaper to build. Isn't that fascinating? Fascinating. So it's about learning curve and it's about change. So this is, remember COVID? Remember that? So this is what we all look like. This is me, I'm upper left there, and I look like I've just, I don't know, gotten really bad financial news or something. The guy to the left of me is clearly dozing. The woman in the upper right checking her phone, and then everyone else, I just had a photograph. But this is what we looked like for a couple of years. So it's really nice to see you all in person. Everyone looks great, by the way. So, but this was the Chicago City Council. And so this idea of the common agenda was presented to the Chicago City Council as, here's what all the other cities around the United States are doing. It's a plan. You can just take it and do it. So what happened thereafter was pretty remarkable. The city of Chicago took the common agenda as their playbook and convened a building decarbonization working group and adopted everything we said as the policy, right? And that's been implemented in this upcoming gas ban will be one of the parts of that. So it's a case where a kind of grassroots initiative informed city policy, and we're moving forward. So I hope that's interesting to you. So far so good, we're hanging in there? Okay, no one's left yet, so I'm just checking. So the next thing I want to talk about is an exhibit called The Energy Revolution. So this is, it was, as with COVID, so many things were delayed. So this was an exhibit at the Chicago Architecture Center. Has anybody been on the boat cruises up in Chicago where you see the architecture? That's CAC. So I was the curator for the Energy Revolution exhibit. It was supposed to open in 2020. That didn't happen. But it opened in 2022 in April. And so the exhibit, Zudi graphics and so on, ran for 9 months. And so here's the opening party, people milling around all together because it was 2022, everyone had vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. It was a remarkable experience. And I'm going to sort of preview for a little, sort of sample it for you. As curator, I gave somewhere between 40 and 50 talks to groups like this. And for most of the groups that I was talking to, I would ask and say, have you ever talked about climate with anybody? And a lot of people said, kind of my first time in person. People would see emails, they'll watch TV, they're scared by fires, et cetera, et cetera. But that actually talking about it with other people about what you can do about it, this was their first experience, and it was absolutely fascinating. So, and at the end, we would always say, okay, what have you learned and what has changed? And people would start saying, well, I'm going to buy a different stove, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. It was absolutely fascinating. So that we learned a lot. The centerpiece of the exhibit were these 3 full-scale walls, and you can't tell they're about 12 feet tall. They are true replicas of 3 iconic Chicago buildings. The one on the left, the Monadnock building, built in the 1880s. The one in the middle was designed by the architect Mies van der Rohe, kind of this glass box modernist from 1952. That's 86880 Lakeshore Drive. And on the right is the Academy for Global Citizenship I showed you a minute ago. So 3 eras of architecture, roughly 70 years apart. Hold that thought. So one of the good things that Chicago did early on in 2014, and I'm going to encourage Toledo to do the same, passed something called the Energy Benchmarking Ordinance. And this is, a lot of cities have this. Toledo does not yet have that. So what it does is it requires buildings larger than 50,000 square feet to post their energy use each year on a public database. And so what it allows you to do is to compare. You know, I live in an apartment building. Is mine efficient or inefficient? You wouldn't know but for this database. And so, and it's a really powerful tool to drive change. So, but nobody had looked at the Chicago benchmarking database until we did a research project. And what we did was we took all 3,000 buildings in the database and sorted them according to the decade in which they were built. And this will, I think this will be of interest. So I have to explain one thing about buildings. So we all of us that know cars, miles per gallon, for efficiency, you want a high miles per gallon. High number is better. For buildings, you want a low number. It's called an EUI, energy use intensity, so lower is better. So if you can see that sort of red line that sort of dances up and down across the decades, we found these 3 bombshells. The most energy efficient buildings in Chicago were built in the 1880s. The least energy efficient buildings were built in the 1950s. All those glass boxes really are terrible for the environment. Terrible climate hostile buildings. The newest buildings from the 2010s were yet to be as efficient as buildings from the 1880s. So you could say, you know, are architects in Chicago or developers in Chicago or really anybody trying that hard at climate? Not hardly, not hardly. And the last thing, which is, I kind of ran out of space on this slide, those newest buildings from the 2010s still use 2 to 3 times more energy than the best in class buildings. So, you know, that curve, how far can it go? It can go a lot. So the best buildings use 1/3 as much energy as buildings from the 1880s. So we know how to do this. This is not inventing anything. It's just being smart about it, right? So that was fascinating, which is why we built those 3 walls. People say, how could that possibly be? So we get to describe it. The building on the left doesn't have that many windows, but it's got big, thick walls. Not a lot of insulation, but mass. The one in the middle is just a perfect radiator. When it's cold outside, all the heat from the building goes right through it. Single pane glass, 87% glass. The one on the right is much more, learns a lot of lessons from the oldest buildings and not from the newest buildings. So another part of the energy revolution was this exhibit we called the electric twin. For a typical homeowner, there are 4 or 5 appliances that many of us have that burn natural gas. And part of the campaign is to figure out how you could make people comfortable and live a good life in a house without a gas line. So how do you do that? Here's the 4 devices to do it. So the first one on the left is a heat pump. Anybody have a heat pump already? So, heat pumps basically do heating and cooling. They are electric. They don't require burning anything. So that can be used for space heating. Next to that is a heat pump hot water heater that can go in your basement. And I have one in my basement, and it keeps the basement dry year round. Does anybody have a wet basement? I have a wet basement, so it's less wet now. So that's that. An induction cooktop, I'll talk to you about that in a minute, which is not the old, what do you call it, the electric resistance cooktops are like mosquito coils, and they turn orange, and they make your pot smell bad. Not that, induction. And then finally, a clothes dryer. We call them clothes dryers, but we really we bake our clothes to dry them, which is sort of silly. Like, what? You don't really have to bake them. So the condensing clothes dryer dehumidifies the clothes. It takes the moisture out, adds a little heat, but mostly it's moisture removal. Isn't that fascinating? So if you have fabrics or clothing that mixes like elastic or is stretchy that gets destroyed in the heat, get one of these, because that's what you want. So if you're a fashionista, I got your clothes dryer for you. Another part of the exhibit were these, what we call this petting zoo. So these are the things that we use. These are high performance building elements. So bird glass, T-stud, offsets for insulation, cross-laminated timbers, etc. So that people can actually touch and compare and see how new buildings are built. And then finally, on the way out, we had this pledge wall where people could write what it was they said they were going to do. And kids were into it, and you can see the mask, so it's COVID legit. The exhibit closed on January 10th of this year. 34,000 people visited in 9 months, which is good. It's not Metro Parks numbers, but it's a good number. Very proud of that. And then a month or so before that, I got the call. So it was the Chicago Architecture Center telling me, hey Doug, we're closing on January 10th. All the exhibits I've just shown you, the walls, the appliances, the petting zoo, said, do you want this stuff or should we landfill it? Well, I don't know. I thought you'd just hang on to it. Well, no, we've got a next exhibit coming. We don't have room for your stuff. Oh my God. So I started to say if they would just store this stuff. Like, Doug, what am I storing for you? Well, they're 3 12-foot walls, and they weigh about 500 pounds each, and they're really hard to get in and out. And it's, okay, I guess, but how long am I doing this, and why am I doing it? And it's like I was getting no. And I had coffee with a friend, and I said, something's wrong here. We're asking the wrong thing. I said, I think we need to start a museum. So I called back all the people that were kind of fidgety about storage. They said, oh, well, if you're starting a museum, I'd love to help you. Well, what's a museum? Storage. It's a better name for storage, right? Oh my God. Go figure. So what we realized was true in Chicago, and I suspect it's true here in Toledo, is that there's a lot of vacant space, particularly in downtown buildings, in the Loop here or in your downtown, that have vacant retail space, and it's not going to rent anytime soon. It's destined to be vacant for a number of years. And so what we did was put out a reverse call. Normally when there's a vacant space, the retail broker sends you a flyer and says, we'd love to rent you this beautiful space for $40 a square foot a year, and blah, 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 blah. They're trying to make money from you. We did the opposite, which is we're a tenant with no money. We would like free space, and here's our conditions. It was crazy. It was a reverse ask. And we took this to BOMA, which is the trade association for the large commercial buildings in Chicago, and we got 6 takers. They called us up and said, yeah, we got vacant space. It's kind of harshing the vibe in the building. People feel bad that everything's so vacant. We'd love to get something in there. So on December 29th of last year, my friend Linda and I went around and looked at, these were 3 of the buildings we were offered. Free rent. Free rent. So on the left is the Rookery, which is a very famous historic building designed by John Root and Daniel Burnham. The middle was the former Brooks Brothers site in Chicago, which was kind of iconic right on LaSalle Street. And then on the right is the lobby of the American Medical Association building. And it's like, I could not believe I was walking through and getting offered, would you please take our space? It's like, I guess that worked. This is really fun. But in the end, our best choice was this. So this is, it was an Alanti restaurant, which is, so, you know, check out that floor, the kind of zigzaggy floor, kind of makes your eyes dance and so on. But this is, so it was an Italian place that will sell you a slice of pizza or a calzone. But they were offering it for free rent. It's right on the Chicago River, high ceilings, high visibility, and we took it on the spot. Said, yes, we like this. So they interviewed us, you know, they did the dog sniff test, washing hands. Did the dog sniff test, everything checked out. And here's the building owners who we sort of finally met and got to know. And the negotiation took about 2 months to go from, we think this is a good idea, to actually having it in writing. So, and the father, Joseph, and then the guy in the white shirt, Adam, are the father and son that own the building. And so Third Millennium Group, if you meet them at an airport or something, hug them and kiss them for me, because they were just so nice. But so our starting gun for opening our museum was March 1st of this year. So we finally had access to this space. We started meetings a couple weeks before that, what we called the meeting of the whole, committee of the whole. And it was every 2 weeks, and it was 20 or 30 people that would come together, and everybody had something to offer. Everyone had questions, clarifying how can we get this done. And we just stuck with it. We just kept meeting. And this was our kind of graphic for a long time of just, we put the super graphic on the front of the space and use that for fundraising and frankly for throwing parties. But hold that for a minute. So this Climate Action Museum is one of 8 climate museums in the world. 8. So Toledo could be 9. But the other one in North America is in New York City, and so our son lives in Brooklyn. We went to visit him last December. I said, we're going to this climate museum because I got a feeling it's going to be important. So here it was in New York. It's in Soho. It's in a storefront, and it's a little pop-up. And I was just taking it in as a kind of thoughtful person and a little bit critical. And so their thesis in this exhibit, if you can read this, art expands our sense of agency. So this is New York. Art matters to them, right? So the thesis is art expands agency. Thesis. Hold that thought. So what's the art that they showed? It's this. So these were magnetized postcards on a wall, and on the front side they were nice scenes, and on the back side you could flip them over and they were dystopian. So on the nice, it's like a landscape. On the back side, the same landscape's on fire. So this is the art. So you could move them around and flip them around, and this is giving you agency, right? Agency. Hold that thought. So then you got to the back and they said, okay, well, we want you to take some climate action. So their suggested climate action were they had these 12 stickers on a roll, and you pick the one that you're interested in and you put it on the wall. And then you go home. So that was the climate action. So, but you may wonder, like, these must be some awesome actions on these stickers, right? So I blew them up for you so you can see them. So, you know, the world, the evil people that are polluting our world must be quaking in their boots because of this New York Climate Action Museum. I saw some art and I got this incredible agency. And I got to the back and there were these stickers, and I took one, I put it on the wall. Take that, right? So the first one on the upper left, I'm going to call my bank. So my bank is Bank of America. I have a 1-800 number for Bank of America, and I tried to do this just as a kind of thought experiment. So I'm like press 1 for deposits, press 2. It's like, no, I'm calling my bank because I'm mad about your climate action. So like, Bank of America was not concerned with this sticker changing anything they were going to do. Next one, I'm going to post on social media. I'm voting. I'm going to push for climate content. This was the shallowest collection of virtue signaling actions I could imagine. It was embarrassing. And so we should all feel good that New York didn't do it right. So whatever we do will be better than this. So in the same spirit as the Mies van der Rohe building of the all-glass box that was terrible at energy, do the opposite of what Mies did, do the opposite of New York. So here's where we started, was this idea, they were onto something, agency. Agency, so I have to explain one thing. Climate is a global crisis, and a lot of people you say, you know, it's a global crisis, so it really requires a global response. It's like, I'll concede that, cool. So let's look at the institutions we have that are global. The United Nations, very effective at compelling change. No. Next down, national governments, United States government, Germany, England, China, very compelling at, changing things. No. So people say it's a big scale thing. The action has to start at the top, and what an individual can do doesn't amount to a hill of beans. That's the kind of conventional wisdom. There's a problem with that. There's a few problems with that. One is the higher up this pyramid that you think about, the slower the change is. If you want the federal government to take action, and at lunch I was talking about, my first presidential vote was for Jimmy Carter in 1976. Remember him? Peanut farmer, he's still alive. I think he's still alive. Just the man is doing something right, whatever. But I voted for him because he wanted to pass a gas tax in 1976. It is now 47 years later, there's no gas tax. So at lunch, somebody said, the right thing is we need a carbon tax, a gas tax. Like, couldn't agree with you more, not gonna happen fast. So the higher up the food chain you go, the slower it is. And think about it, when a federal government acts, as the United States just did with the Inflation Reduction Act, made a lot of money available and so on, didn't actually change anything. It empowered other people to take that action, and we are those people. So how does a nation change? The government has a role, but the action's actually taken by the people, the governments, the institutions, the private sector, all those kinds of things. That's what we're talking about. So it is finding your agency, those things over which you have control, inventory those, and do as many of them as you can. So that's the premise of the Climate Action Museum. So another thing I want to sort of lay out here is that people say, oh, Climate Action Museum, that's really nice. I like butterflies. Well, so do I. And that's nice if you're working to save butterflies or something like that, but it's off topic. So this is, I'm going to be really unpopular with this, which is to say, you can like the butterflies, or you can like flooding, or you can like all the kind of issues that are climate related or climate adjacent. What the Climate Action Museum is talking about, and I'm talking about, is the atmosphere. So this is back to science. If you remember, we have a sun that's 93 million miles away. The sun hits the Earth. There was an equilibrium in terms of how much of the heat was captured in the planet and how much bounced back into space. We've filled the atmosphere with all kinds of stuff that traps that gas, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. So if it's not that, it's probably still a good idea, but I think it's our collective responsibility to take care of the greenhouse gas emissions first. You can do butterflies. I don't want to get between you and your butterflies. That's really sweet, and I'm for that. But we're skipping past this one thing that requires us all to act collectively and doing other things. We are kind of scattered in our thinking. So we're talking about the atmosphere. Here's an analogy for you that on the banks of the Maumee might just register. And this is more or less an Al Gore paraphrase. Al's not in the room tonight, that's good. But here's our quote, we're using our atmosphere as an open sewer. So if you pollute stuff into it, it's not regulated, it's not taxed, there's no one catching you about it. And you think back to the Maumee and that famous photograph in Cleveland from 1958 where the Cuyahoga caught on fire. That's exactly what we did with rivers and lakes for a long time. The US EPA came in, mostly cleaned it up, but we're doing it with the atmosphere. The atmosphere is still largely unregulated, and its consequences were trapping heat and becoming Oklahoma, right? So, and these are the greenhouse gases, prominent ones, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and then fluoridated gases. Quick pictures of this, pollution comes from burning fossil fuels is upper left. This is another one, clearing land, deforestation for agriculture, for suburbs, for subdivisions, all of it is again changing the extent to which heat is trapped in the United States or on the planet. Livestock, does anybody eat beef every day? Please don't. But a lot of the methane comes from beef stock, so there is a world of difference in terms of where you get your protein. Chicken better, tofu much better, beans much better, and I'm not saying that guy was making me eat tofu. Please, no, don't say that in moderation, but scale back the beef. How we do our agriculture, our nitrogen fertilizers produce nitrous oxide and then fluoridated gases. So Climate Action Museum, really it has come together in the most remarkable way. We passed the hat, we have no foundation funding yet because it's too slow. If you go to a foundation and say, we're starting a Climate Action Museum, and mind you, we signed the lease on March 1st, I put on a credit card the cost of moving those 3 walls I showed you. So they were sitting on a loading dock, and the guy kept calling me like, where are you gonna put these things? When can I get them out of here? I'm gonna start charging you interest. It's like, I don't really have a place yet. So we really passed the hat and made this happen with a lot of communitarianism, teamwork. So here's our punchline, the belief is something like this. In the same way that smoking is a social pattern, smoking cigarettes. If your parents smoked, you're more likely to smoke. If your friends smoke, you're more likely to smoke. Siblings, same. If your best friend quits, you're more likely to quit. So we are social beings. We cue off what the people around us are doing. So our proposal for the Climate Action Museum is we want to get people in there and to come with their social groups. So if somebody comes in and says, my next car is going to be an electric vehicle, or getting rid of my stove, or whatever the thing is, there's a social impact in that social circle. That's how we change. If in the 70s, who was the first person to buy bell bottoms, right? You're the cool kid, everyone copies you until they went out of style and you went to skinny jeans or whatever, but like we follow the people around us. So that's what we're counting on that. As I said, we are the 8th climate museum. Here's the map of where the others are, mostly Europe, 1 in Asia, 1 in South America. So proud to be 8. And Istanbul was also has a museum which we didn't know about at the time. On Earth Day last year, we had a party. The other thing is I'm really committed to this idea of it cannot be doom and gloom. Climate's, it's heavy enough, right? So we throw the best parties. We have a sound system so loud. It actually, if you've ever seen the movie Spinal Tap, 11, it goes to 12, but we've only ever turned it up to 4 because the windows start rattling. So like, the Climate Museum has the best sound system you've ever heard of, so we love that. But for our opening night party, we had sketch comedy by Second City. They came in and made climate funny, and we laughed at ourselves. So we laughed at foibles and so on. So a lot of fun. This is our June 21st opening, so we signed our lease on March 1st, opened 15 weeks later. Under 4 months, no museum. Right? No funding, right? No rent, which was very nice. And just some touch points, because I'm inviting you all to come visit, so I don't want to over-present it so that there's something waiting for you to learn about. But one of the most powerful things that we can do for climate is live in and make and plan lovable places. So it is not trivial tonight that we are meeting in this wonderful park in a great city, right? Why am I saying all this? Couple things. Has anyone heard of something called blue zones? Blue zones? So these are places, there's 5 around the world identified by National Geographic magazine, where people live more than 100 years old because they are so contented. And a lot of those people have pretty much born, raised, lived their lives, and are 103 years old in the same town. Americans, by contrast, move 7 times in their life. We drive 14,000 miles a year, which is actually, on average, for an American, once around the planet. South Pole, equator, North Pole, equator, South Pole, every 23 months. We are crazy. We're all over the place doing all this to make ourselves happy. Meanwhile, the most contented human beings on the earth don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. The biggest single source of climate pollution in the United States is vehicles, and it's us going from here to there, or living in Toledo, commuting to Ann Arbor, blah, 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 blah. You can fill it in. Or, you know, if you're super affluent, I have a friend that commutes to a house in Arizona. Oh my God. And is a very proud environmental architect. Don't get me started. So the places we make, and places that are so lovable that we don't want to leave there, is one of the most profoundly powerful climate actions you can take. So the investment in this waterfront, investment in Toledo, climate action number 1. Number 2, in built-out cities, and I'm sure this would be true for Toledo, like in Chicago, something like approaching 70% of all energy use is attached to buildings. The actual heating, cooling, and operating of them, and then the power. A lot of our power is used in buildings, so buildings are a big deal. So in the exhibit, we propose this idea of a climate school of architecture, where the architects and the builders and everybody involved recognizes that buildings play a key role in reducing climate impacts, and that we should really focus on it and make this the highest priority. So it's not a fashion show. It's just kind of what we need to do to protect our fragile existence. Does anybody know what this is? This is an induction cooktop. And if the video works, I'll turn it on in a second. But so an induction cooktop was invented in 1933 in Chicago. It uses magnets and cookware that has iron in it, you know, steel. So the magnet sort of oscillates like 600 times a second. And you'll see these at the appliance store, and they're always a slab of black glass. And you say, why is that so expensive? What does it really do? I don't get it. So we hired an artist to pry the lid off and put a glass lid on it. And let's see if this works. So this stove would burn up so fast if you ever turned it on, because there's a little plastic LED lights. So I'm sorry this isn't an actual consumer product, because I think it would be the sexiest stove I've ever seen. But we show it, and we took the lid off it, because if you look closely, around the 4 burners, it's a motherboard of a computer. This cooktop has more diodes, transistors, electronics than you'd ever know. And you compare it to the silly old sort of 4-coil, you know, mosquito thing. It's a piece of technology that's marvelous, marvelous, and you wouldn't know that. So people can't choose things they don't understand, is what I believe. So once you see oh, I kind of get what this is doing. Okay, that's pretty cool. So in the museum, we have, these are highlights. We have a whale. You heard me right, a whale. So you come into the museum, we fill your head with ideas about the actions you can take differently. And what we thought was important was that there be a respite where you are lifted from what choices I'm being asked to make and transported to just a place between. And so here's the whale. I don't know if you can hear this. So we play whale sounds. The lights are sound triggered. It goes through cycles, and then we're still finishing it up. But you're in this whale for 30 seconds to 2 or 3 minutes. We've got little sayings on there, little philosophical quotes about the right thing to do in life or the purpose of life, these kinds of things. And people reflect. And then you leave the whale and you come to the do your part wall. And so this is where we've made it easy for people. If you're this idea of agency, like what do I control? What can I actually impact, right? So if you're a legislator, you've got a longer list. If you're a homeowner, we've got a good list for you. Own a car, got a list for you. You're a kid, you have agency. Nag your parents. Nag your parents. If you're a governor, long list. President, massive list. Head of a corporation, long list. And then everybody, you can see there, and just above it, visitors from places that don't have a climate action museum, our recommendation, start a climate action museum. And we've got people in Oakland, California, Denver, Colorado, that we are corresponding with about starting museums. It's pretty cool. So that was 10% of the museum, so please come visit. So what should what should Toledo do on climate? So on Sunday, when I was pulling this together, I went to the Blade, the Journal, and the Point and Shoreland Journal, which I'd never really heard of, to try and get a bead on what was in the news in Toledo. Climate wasn't there. Anybody surprised? Climate was not making the front pages on Sunday. So the point then is start the conversation. And we're starting it tonight. So it's got to be part of the conversation. People have to be talking about it at dinner, at public meetings, all that kind of stuff. Next one is visit the Climate Action Museum. In case you don't know where Chicago is, I have made a little map with 2 stars. I checked on Google if you're driving the speed limit, 3 minutes and 55 seconds from my hotel to the museum. So 4 hours. I recommend you carpool. No one fly, please. Amtrak via Ann Arbor is another choice. So please come visit, and I'd love to, serious about that. Let's organize a trip. Embrace the common agenda. So again, we've done the homework here. This is what other cities are doing on decarbonization. You don't have to bear the burden of being first, but you actually could be first in that mid-tier, the kind of middle-sized cities. Berkeley all the college towns are probably ahead of you, and they're maybe even smaller, but just do this. And so declare a climate emergency, have a policy, benchmarking ordinance and so on. And so I've changed the dates, 2024, to have this all done by the end of the decade. Climate Action Museum, Toronto, where is Toronto? Toledo. Where you put a Climate Action Museum matters. And so here's where you're kind of crude, graphic, but hopefully effective. I think there should be a Climate Action Museum on the waterfront. And it could be part of the next phase of Metro Parks investments. It could be affiliated with Imagination Station or the History Museum, or there's a million ways to do this. And I'll just say we've raised about $160,000 to do our museum, which is a drop in the bucket for all this stuff. A lot of volunteers helped us out. This is attainable. It can go fast. You can steal everything we have, take our plans, and just do it. And then this is maybe the most exciting idea that came out of today, which was talking to Metro Parks, talking to the library about, what were their ambitions about, sustainability and particularly sort of building performance standards. And they kind of were like, they weren't doing it. And if you've heard of LEED or worked with LEED, it's a little bureaucratic and a lot of paperwork. I get it. So I think there's an opportunity for Toledo to develop its own standard, the Toledo way, the Toledo standard, that's rigorous, that works for Toledo, and is not BS, is not greenwashing. So that's what I think you should do. I think we're at that time to ask for you to clap and then pose your questions. One more. I'm sorry. Decarbonize Toledo Metro Park. So Fritz made the mistake of sending me the list of the 218 buildings in the database for the metro parks. These were the 20 largest ones. The smallest of the number 20 is 5,000 square feet, and the biggest one is 57,000 square feet. So maybe start with the biggest one and just work your way through it. But I don't know how many of these are heated by, have fossil fuel connections. Just the new ones are the easiest to do, the retrofits. My advice is don't on a Thursday say, I've got to tear apart this perfectly fine building to decarbonize it. No. When the boilers go, that's your time. When the facade is broken, that's your time. You just, figure out what the aging parts of your building are and do it at the right time. When you were going to spend money anyway, spend it smarter. That's it. So don't be crazy. Don't set your hair on fire. And this is the part now, I think, where, thank you. Are there questions? How are we doing, by the way? Hanging in there? Okay. People are polite, very polite.
Okay, so we have myself and then Nate in the back that will walk the aisles and grab the questions that you have, and then we'll bring those up front. So we welcome you to share your thoughts.